Councillor McFadden, you'd mentioned you wanted to come back in. I'll let you in at this point.
Yes, I had a question possibly for Craig, if you could indulge me on, actually it's in connection with item number 6. It's to do with health issues and, you know, what the council can do health-wise for people. So I'll try and be quick. So 3 years ago, out the blue, I had a stroke. And first thing I wondered was, where did that come from? The thing is, now I know why. I was overweight, slightly diabetic, slightly high blood pressure, blah, blah, blah. So that's fair enough. That happened. But subsequently, in the last 3 and a bit years, I've spoken to maybe 50 people, relatives, friends, customers, and stuff like that have been in a similar position. There were strokes and heart attacks. And they've all been completely unaware of the lead up to it. They're really not, you know, they didn't expect it. They all thought it was out of the blue. Now, the long and the short of that is they were all attending doctors for one reason or another, and the doctors are dead busy. You go in, they try and process you through. You're there for a quick blood pressure check. They tell you to lose a bit of weight, maybe give you some more pills, or you go for a quick diabetic check, go away, and that's it. They never, in my case and anyone else's case, sat you down and said, here's the cumulative effect of the things that are wrong with you at the moment. Here's what's coming down the line. And maybe you should come in now for a blood coagulation test, which is dead cheap, to see whether you should go on a blood thin and out, avoid a stroke or a heart attack. Come in and have cholesterol tests. I never had any of them. Very few of them had ever been asked to come in for cholesterol tests. So when we're talking about, you know, people's becoming ill and what we can do as a council, there must be something to do. And probably I should be asking this question in a medical theatre, but I've got no opening and exposure to do that. Why, unlike the cigarettes, with cancer and cigarettes, there's big pictures, you know, it's very obvious you're smoking, it's a big risk and you're taking that risk. But with other conditions whereby not one particular one of them is completely debilitating, because you're busy, you're at work, you've got family, you've got responsibilities, everything's going on. But there must be some way that somehow this council could have some influence in trying to get people being made aware of the collective effects of all the sort of smaller things that's wrong with them is going to turn into something serious. That's a huge hole in the information that I, as a patient, all the people I've spoken to really got. They walked headlong in to their own stroke, their own heart attack, their own whatever. And from all the people I've spoken to, they were really unaware of how it went together, and they were not offered any preventative testing that was aimed at the collective effect of what the things that was wrong with them. I think that's a massive problem. And if I've spoken to 50 people and none of them have said to me, oh, well, I was told, sat down for all these tests and I just carried on and I had my heart attack, I had my stroke. None of them said that. So what can this council do? Something needs to be done about something like that. Thank you. Sorry, and thanks for indulging me.
Thanks very much for that, John. And that absolutely is important. And just obviously moving forward, we'll try and ask in the sections. But I appreciate that. I called to you later and you asked to come in. That's absolutely fine. For that. Is it okay if I could bring maybe Craig in first, David, if that's okay?
So there's things we as a council can do. Some things, obviously, in terms of some of the health interventions, then very much that sits within health. But through the Health and Social Care Partnership, then there's definitely opportunities for us collectively to feed in and to interact with that. So there's a range of risk factors, as you've described, that would typically, if they present a particular way, then you could understand that person's at a greater risk of a heart attack or stroke or something, or diabetes in later life. So as Eddie had mentioned earlier on, the amount of people living with conditions as they get older become more and more. We know that's the case round about, whether that be high blood pressure, whether it be diabetes, and a lot of that's about lifestyle, and actually being us able to intervene much earlier and change not change the lifestyle, so that's, the individual has to do that, but actually educate people around about what lifestyle choices mean in later life. That is a big part of it. when we brought the wellbeing review, the cross-cut review of wellbeings back in June, we brought that to council. One of the areas we wanted to focus on there, one of the recommendations that we are working to develop plans round about, I've got it in front of us, excuse me, I'll maybe just read it. It spoke about the benefits of engaging communities, promoting good health and wellbeing are well established, include reduced dependence in formal services, through improved lifestyle choices, better self-care and self-management. Community engagement also supports effective targeting of interventions to address specific health issues and improve local outcomes. And it goes on. The specific recommendation then is that Council agrees that further work is undertaken with communities to address health-related issues and create new opportunities for local leadership on health and wellbeing. So it's us as a council actually supporting communities to take more ownership round about those very areas that you described. So not about John's got this, this and this. It's much more about in a community. If you think you're overweight, if you're not particularly active, if you've got high blood pressure or diabetes, or if there's a history of certain things in your family, then you are likely to be at a greater risk. And here's some of the things we can do to support you. So that type of education process is something that we're really keen to develop across and within our communities. How can we help people do that? So through our Vibrant Communities team, for example. So some of the work we're doing with the chat team, as we call them, that operate in and across our communities. And that was part of the conversation this morning that we then sit within the Leisure Trust going forward. Is very much about them engaging with communities in a different way and understanding the risk factors and how we take things forward. So that type of stuff as a council is absolutely where we can support it. In terms of some of the specifics about actually when you do have those existing conditions, coexisting conditions, what does that mean for risk round about that? How can we make sure that our GPs and the broader sort of health teams wrapped round about people can make sure that those risks are well understood and we can put plans in place? That's something we absolutely want to take forward as well. We are already doing that. It's clearly not as well developed as it should be, as you've just described, but that's something that we do want to take forward as well. There was, I can't remember where it was, earlier this year, probably just the turn of year, February, March time, there was a heart screening process that took place at the Park Hotel, ran for a whole day. It was massively oversubscribed. It wasn't. It ran through health, but it was actually a charity that supported it. And they did a variety of different sort of screening things there. So atrial fibrillation, different things. So they're really quick tests they can do. And it was, as I say, it was massively oversubscribed. It was just a pop in and you can get these things done. I think by about lunchtime, people were getting turned away. They were there till 4 o'clock. By lunchtime, folk were getting turned away because the queue was so big they wouldn't have seen people on that day. So folk and the communities want to engage. We know that folk want to engage round about it. We just need to give them the tools and opportunities to do that. So taking that and actually expanding it is where that's what that recommendation was about. So that's a piece of work we do want to take forward. It's not about us within health and social care. It's not about Vibrant Communities. It's not about the doctor. It's about everybody together actually joining all of that up. Just had a wee wry smile when you described yourself in terms of this is what I was and this is what happened to me. You could have been describing me or probably many other people in the room as well. So I think we all just need to take a look at who we are and what our lifestyles are, and actually we are all probably sleepwalking into some of those future health conditions as well. So actually getting that education message out there is really, really important. So hopefully that's helpful, but there is a piece of work emerging round about it, but it's something we absolutely need to embed more and more with our communities, and the bit about self-management and people taking responsibility for it is key, but actually helping them to do that, providing the education, the tools is important.
Oh yeah, is that okay, John? Yeah. There's a couple of people want to come in. David Richardson.
Thanks, Provost. No, it was thanks to John, to Councillor McFadden for opening up about his own experiences there. I was just going to say, if MD ever gets a GP's letter in offering them I'm going to call it a well person check. When mine came in, I was aged about 25 at the time. They were called well man checks then. I was a lot thinner then, so I wasn't as heavy. I was doing a stressful job, but I thought I'll take it. It was Dr. Pugh in Somerville in the town, and I took them up on this option to go in for a well man check. And as I say, I was only 25 years of age. Now, that well man check showed that my blood pressure was absolutely through the roof. I was sent to Cross House for CAT scans. I was tested for every type of cancer under the sun. I had to take samples of urine into my GP for about a year. So they were really, really thorough. I hope that back in the days, I think maybe the GPs had more time. I'm not sure. I don't know if they still do these well-man checks. But what it did show, after about a year, basically the GP diagnosed me with having hypertension. And that just means I've got high blood pressure, but there's no underlying cause. I just have high blood pressure. And ever since the days, I've been taking a wee concoction of pills every morning. So thanks to the Councillor McFadden for opening up about his own experiences. My experiences are that it's all about early diagnosis and prevention, because it is high blood pressure. It's the cumulative effect over years that bring on stroke and heart attack. So, you know, I've got 30 years of popping pills behind me, so hopefully that'll delay the stroke and heart attack a wee bit. But it was just to say, if MD in the chamber, or if you're ever speaking to people about these things, if GPs are still offering these well-manned tests, take them up on it, go and get yourself checked out. Because one of the things the GP told me at the time, and I think it was Dr. Somerville, who was a cracking wee guy, he says 40% of the population are walking about with high blood pressure, but they don't know it. So the quicker you get diagnosed, the better.
That is important. And John, I see that angle you're coming from then, and your own experience, you wouldn't have had that perspective perhaps otherwise. That's really interesting, actually. Aye. So no, thanks for raising that. Councillor Clay Maitland.
I too would like to thank John for raising that. I think it's extremely important. My father had a heart attack at 54 and was fit and healthy, and we don't know where it came from. However, it might have been the Glasgow effect again. I just wanted to come up with say a couple of things. When I was younger in the 80s and I was travelling, when I went to America, I was absolutely obsessed. They were obsessed with their health because, of course, there it's insurance and it's money. So there's every effort made by the insurance companies, and every second advert was for, you know, blood pressure, etc. And in Germany, where they were super fit, all the men and the ageing population, it was because it was a cultural thing. So that takes me back to the Glasgow effect. And we still have it today because men will not engage generally with the GPs. By the time they turn up at a GP and get referred to consultant, it's often too late. And that's quite blunt. Self-care is one of the hardest things for all of us to do, and for men in particular. So I was just going to say there was an app that was one of the good news stories, and it was a nudger for good health. So I think that's maybe perhaps something that we could share with all the members. It was a good news story in the IJB presentation recently, and it's a bit like your smartwatch, but it's a bit better than that, and it just nudges you towards better health and better decisions. So it might be something that we want to look at. Thank you.
Oh, I'm kind of enjoying this conversation. It's really interesting. Leader.
Well, I know we're kind of getting off a wee bit, but just briefly, because that's quite it's kind of close to my own heart in terms of we had a great presentation at IJB from where the Dundonald Road surgery had a you know, kind of looking at lifestyle, and then they started a group, you know, and I think that was really helpful. I wrote to my own practice, you know, another practice in Kilmarnock, and I'm still to hear from them, but that's something that we could maybe look at through the workplaces. I think it's a conversation we need to take place. I think there's been loads of references today about ageing and and all the rest of it, but I think something we could look at as an employer, as well as just looking after staff. That's maybe something we could take offline.
Thank you. Councillor Stephen Cannon.
Just a quick one. Obviously, it's an important topic. I mean, just to pick up on David's point, they still do well-man check, because I booked one yesterday at my local surgery. The point John was making about rushing around, I just wonder if we should be targeting employers, because that's why a lot of people don't go. A lot of people know it's wrong, but they don't have time. So if we went to employers and said, look, you should be pushing this. I mean, I think maybe that's linked into what Dougie said a minute ago about working with employers. So that was, because people do know about it, but they don't have the time. As John says, they're rushing about. But if their employer said, almost made it compulsory to go to get the check, that might be a way around it.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm really keen to move on given the time. Barry Douglas, you want to?
No, Provost, it was just to say that whilst item 6 obviously has been well dealt with, and welcome the conversation, maybe it's an item for a councillor conversation, just mindful of the rest of the agenda, Provost. Thanks.
No, absolutely. Thanks for that, Councillor Douglas. Is that okay then, John? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. I know, and thanks, Council, for the indulgence, absolutely. Okay, so move on to agenda item 8, and it's the East Ayrshire Children's Services annual performance update, and I'll ask Marion to bring in the report. Thanks, Marion.
Thanks, Provost. Members, I'm pleased to present to you the annual Children's Services Plan report. The report sets out the multi-agency activity that's taken place over 22-23. beg your pardon, 23-24. And as we strive to work on the 5 key priority areas that are set out in the report. Excuse me. In terms of governance, the report was endorsed by the Children and Young People Strategic Partnership, following which it was approved by the Community Planning Partnership Board, which is where oversight and decision making is vested. The report's now being presented to Council and Ayrshire and Arran NHS Board as the 2 named public bodies in the 2014 Act for information and discussion. This is the first annual report of the 3-year cycle of planning for children and covers the period 2023 to 2026. As part of the process for developing the plan, children and young people, parents, carers and those who support them were consulted. This led to the confirmation of the 5 key priority areas. Those priority areas are: priority 1, our children and young people feel respected, listened to and influence change. Priority area 2, working collaborative, we will reduce the impact of social and economic poverty on our children and young people. Priority area 3, our children and young people feel safe. Priority area 4, our children and young people have the best start in life and achieve their potential. Priority area 5, our children and young people's mental health and wellbeing is improving. I'm sure you will appreciate the extensive range, depth and breadth of the activity that's taken place by all key multi-agency partners in working towards the key priority areas. I will pick out some key points from the report that in no way cover all of the activity has been ongoing, but perhaps may serve to illustrate some of it. In terms of key priority 1, our children and young people feel safe. Beg your pardon, our children and young people feel respected, listened to and influence change. Some of the key areas profiled are, I was going to say, but for a profile some of the areas, I think we recognise this as a huge area of importance, given that this is the year that the United Convention on the Rights of the Child was enshrined in Scottish legislation, with the UNCRC Incorporation Act coming live. This is a seminal piece of legislation that affects us all and affects all services, not just those that directly support children. We introduced a range of mechanisms to empower children and young people to be at the heart of decision making and within their own lives and support service delivery. So some of the key initiatives that we've looked at in relation to this is around the work of the Children and Young People's Cabinet, and some of that work features in the annual plan. Art Club has continued to provide a place for the voice of children in our care and care experienced children and young people. The Active Schools Leadership training, which included team building and training along with dedicated time to reflect on how they could implement change going forward within school and community via the schools councils. Active Schools also delivered a primary leadership programme for P6 classes in all primary schools, empowering pupils to lead and design lunch clubs and playground games. So turning to priority area 2, which is working collaboratively, we will reduce the impact of social and economic poverty on our children and young people. In taking this forward, we have been working collaboratively with national and local partners. We have continued to provide the immediate support and care that people need to allow them to live well, and also put in place our long-term strategic plans to grow our economy in an inclusive way that supports the well-being of people across communities. Again, key initiatives included the School Meals Initiative, which introduced the lunchtime meal crunch deal for children and young people from P6 until they leave secondary school, and this saw an increased uptake in school meals. Play and Early Intervention and Home Link team, who provided opportunities for children, young people and their families to access free learning, leisure and play opportunities. And I think in terms of numbers, from January 23 to February 24, nearly 3,000 children, and nearly 100 adult access free swimming through the Shout Card initiative. Our financial inclusion team Pathfinder projects introduced in both the schools and early years to supported health colleagues working with families and young people, and that realised £1.2 million in additional benefits for children and their families. So key priority area 3, children and young people feel safe. Focusing on this, partners focused on ensuring that children and young people in East Ayrshire were kept safe from abuse, harm and neglect, and looked to strengthen and support what we had in place in terms of the child protection register and their families. Key initiatives included the trauma-informed contact and care, which is a police and education intervention focused on early intervention, safeguarding partnership, which ensures that the school is notified prior to the start of a school day if there's been an incident of domestic abuse to which the child or young person has been exposed. Cherishing Our Family strategy, which is underpinned by children's rights and focuses on tackling neglect and neglectful behaviours. And this is through listening to children, supporting families in the right way at the right time, working collaboratively across agencies, and again, focusing in on the impact of poverty, given the challenges that can cause for families. Again, at East Ayrshire campus police officers run the Pitching In programme in partnership with the Killie community, a Kilmarnock Football Club charity. Outcomes for those young people that participated in the programme were reported as positive, with the majority of young people highlighting improvements in respect of attendance, referrals and involvement in antisocial behaviour. Priority 4, which was our children and young people have the best start in life and achieve their potential. Focusing in on this, partners implemented a series of innovative programmes to support our children and young people to develop and achieve their full potential. One of the key initiatives included focusing in on the communication champions. So at the end of 2023-24, 93% of our childhood centres had at least one active communication champion, whose role is to drive forward the initiatives to promote the development of language and communication skills, recognising the impact of this in terms of lifelong achievements and outcomes. Priority Area 5, which is our children and young people's mental health and wellbeing, is improving. In our schools and other settings that we work with children and young people, we were successfully encouraged and supported our institutions to increase their capacity to prevent the mental health problems from developing in the first place. Some of the key initiatives included ongoing support from the school counselling service, which continues to be provided by the Exchange, and they currently deliver a range of activities and services across schools in East Ayrshire, providing an evidence-based support and accredited training as part of a whole system, resilience-focused approach to mental health and wellbeing. And that's now been extended to our under-10s who previously did not have access to this support. So, as I said earlier, I only touched on a few things that are contained in the report. There's so much more in there. So I've really not done it justice, but I'm conscious that some of you have probably seen this already. So I hope what I've touched on illustrates more than anything how brilliant our children are and the folk that support them too. Final word from me would be to show appreciation to all involved, but in particular Sarah McCready, who wrote the last word in the annual report, and who also profiled some of the challenges that our infants, children and young people experience. So in conclusion, I turn you to paragraph 2 and the recommendations. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bonnie, and completely agree. The young folk are the best. Would MD like to come in with any questions or points? Councillor Mabin.
Thank you, Provost. I had a look at this earlier and I'm looking very hard at the page 214 to 15 about the iLunch early learning sessions. Sorry, family learning sessions. Summer of 23, as a fairly new councillor, I had no idea what an iLunch was, and I was very curious. I went to some of these sessions at the Howard Park, and along with Councillor Linda Mabin, we went to other sessions up in Auchinleck at, is it Merlin Park? Merlin Park in Auchinleck, and attended more of these sessions. They were not well attended. Unfortunately, the families weren't engaging well enough with us, and at some of these sessions there was only 1 or 2 mums turning up with 1 or 2 kids. What I'm curious about is the costing of this. There's on the paper here there is no cost to this activity. I'm wondering if this is best value for money when families aren't engaging and we're not getting the best use of the time. I would also like to say that the HomeLink workers who were doing these sessions were brilliant. So no disparity on them. They are excellent. They are very enthusiastic and trying their best to do a service during the summer holidays. I'm wondering also, is this a statutory service that we've got to supply to these children who are not engaging? Thank you. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Peter. Linda?
Thanks, Councillor Mayben. I'm happy to come back on that. So no, it's not a statutory service, but clearly I know lots of members in the room will remember this under the guise of the Scottish Attainment Challenge, when clearly that's when iLunch commenced. So when we were firmly a Scottish Attainment Challenge authority, if you like, we're now all strategic equity funded now. So clearly we've seen a huge diminution in the monies awarded for these types of initiatives. So it's not statutory. My recall is members agreeing that clearly, you know, holiday hunger and family engagement was an issue, and clearly it's just something we've always done in that respect. I can see the figures in the report, Councillor Mayben, that you're referring to. It is a kind of joint service between Vibrant Communities, Education, other services, and clearly you can see the figures there. So ultimately, you can see the Easter holiday, 109 families. You can see clearly 176 parents and carers, 364 children. So I suppose we can come back with further information regards viability of that service, but my concern obviously is for those 176 parents and carers and the 364 children who did attend those sessions in that respect. And I would thoroughly agree, and Blair is still there, but I would thoroughly agree that the Vibrant Community colleagues providing those services and some of the activities for the young people have been absolutely great. So whilst I can't speak for the engagement levels, we absolutely can commit to come back with some more information, Councillor Mayben.
Thanks for that, Linda. Is that okay?
Thank you, Provost, and thank you, Linda. I definitely think it's something we need to place under a small review, especially with the costs attached. If maybe there's a better way to do this with the money we've got available. Thank you.
Okay.
Happy with colleagues in the room to go and look at that under the umbrella of children's services. Councillor Mayben, no problem at all.
That's fine. Thank you. Councillor Jim Todd.
Thank you, Provost. Thanks, Marion. A couple of things. One's about breastfeeding. Absolutely brilliant with the chat. Could you give us a wee bit more about that, if that has been successful up and down the county? And the second one is, well, obviously nobody wants to get our young folk into the justice system. It gets to that tip point, and I've had umpteen discussions with community justice over this, about certain individuals, and I know it's the figures are going down, but how do we deal with those real problem individuals? And there's only one or two. And at what point do you really say, you know, you're really treading the line and you're tipping over into the justice system here? We can't protect you anymore.
Thanks. Councillor Todd, my apologies, I nearly slipped up there. So thank you for the question. In terms of breastfeeding rates, it's a real challenge actually, because breastfeeding rates are actually directly linked to poverty, and generally speaking, folk in our most deprived communities struggle to uptake breastfeeding, albeit we know the longer term benefits are massively significant for them in terms of attachment with their child, but also health benefits for the child as well. So Baby Chat is one initiative that strives to focus in on, it does more than just breastfeeding. As you can see, it focuses in on connections, loneliness, isolation. Being a new parent can be really challenging. So it strives to do a lot more than just focusing on breastfeeding. Our uptake rates are not too bad in terms of how it compares with national average. But after a 6-8 week period of time, we do fall off. So there is a bit of renewed focus that we're taking forward around that in terms of breastfeeding champions within the health visiting teams, for example. So we would anticipate that over the next 12 months that we would see that having an impact. If it doesn't have an impact, we need to think about what else we need to do in the context that this has been really stubborn in terms of shifting it. So we've seen small shifts, but they're really tiny shifts, you know, not even full percentage points that move on a year-on-year basis, and it can fluctuate. So we're looking at that as part of the ongoing work within my team. In relation to children who become in conflict with the law, the numbers are reducing year on year. Actually, if you look at over probably a 10 or 15 year period of time, the number of children who've been referred to the Children's Reporters Ground has seen an enormous reduction from probably 600 children here 15 years ago to, you a really small number in comparison now, massive drop. We tend to know we've got a whole systems approach locally, and that's a national approach. We've implemented that incredibly well locally. It's led by one of my service managers. There's a whole scheme of activity that takes place in keeping children away from the courts, particularly, but from the children's hearing system as well. Because as soon as you start entering into the children's hearing system, it's much more easy to escalate into justice. So we seek to support people in a much more less formal way. There are a number of activities that take place, really focused activities around diversion from prosecution, for example. However, when that doesn't work, and it doesn't work for everyone, some young people do become engaged in much more challenging behaviour. We have targeted support, so I could bore you to tears with the various programmes and intervention techniques that are deployed by the team, but we're heavily supported by the Centre for Youth and Criminal Justice at Strathclyde University to look at what we can do differently. And there's some things that we know will make a difference for children in terms of helping them to desist from antisocial behaviour and helping them to desist from then escalating into the justice system, so formally into places like justice orders. Those things are helping them achieve the best they can be. So how do we keep our children at school? So it's a really key factor in relation to that, understanding the situations that they're living around, the trauma and difficult circumstances, domestic abuse, mental health, alcohol and drug use within a family context. How do we support young people manage some of that? So when you put all of that together in terms of a package of supports, those are the kind of things that we're trying to do. We recognise actually post-pandemic there's probably been an increase in, not a huge increase, it might feel like it. Honestly, the numbers are for us are not showing a huge increase, but definitely seen a bit of an increase, probably more in terms of the seriousness of what folk are getting involved in. So we're looking at how, as from a social work perspective, how do we support that group of young people in a much more targeted way? So looking to develop probably a much more dedicated youth and welfare and justice team that supports children who are in conflict with the law or on the fringes of conflict with the law. So that's something that we're looking to develop at the moment as well. So there's quite a lot happening around this, and hope that answered the question, at least in part. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Marion. I'll pass over to Craig MacArthur.
Just to pick up on Marion, won't have seen this because it's just an email that's come in the last few hours round about breastfeeding rates. So we've got the latest figures provided by the consultant dietitian that works in public health, who's just shared the latest figures on a pan-Ayrshire basis. Purely because we've invested a wee bit of money over the last number of years and worked with the breastfeeding network to try and do some intensive work to try and increase that on a pan-Ayrshire basis. So what they're showing is that from 2017-18 to 2023-24, the purely breastfed at 6 to 8 weeks, as Marion had highlighted, has went up by 3.9 percentage points, which seems quite small. But if you take that as a true percentage increase, it's actually increased by 23% in that relatively short period of time, so over the last 5 or 6 years. There's been a couple of wee blips in there because it is quite sort of volatile in terms of the trends, but the overall trend is definitely it's an improving picture that we're seeing, and we'll continue to work really hard to do that, because I think what we have seen, just in relation to some of those earlier conversations about early intervention prevention, that breastfed babies and infants tend to have a much healthier life as we go on, so it is an area of real focus for us. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Craig. Deputy Leader.
Thank you, thanks for that, Marion. I just wish some of these services were a bit more available in the 70s and 80s. I had a phone call for a woman in her 50s last night that was abused when she was in the 70s and 80s. That case is live and in the papers just now, where the man admitted to a lewd acts. If you just stay with me, I'm going to quote what his interview said. I flashed at her, and it was many, many years ago. I never laid my hands on her. I don't know the purpose. It was just something that happened. I hold my hands up to that. As I say, I did think it was more than once. He didn't admit to the other lewd acts, but he admitted to that. What astonishes me is there was no counselling there for the lassies back then. if we had teachers that was informed like we have now around about trauma-informed care. A woman was in tears last night. She described to me that in front a jury come back with a ludicrous decision in not probing after admitting in the court. So that's what we're up against, and it just comes at the right time as we're fast approach the 16-day campaign this month that these cases are there. But had these services been in place, there might have been somewhere for that young lassie to go to.
Absolutely. Thank you. Councillor Claire Maitland.
Thanks. Just before I go into what I want to say, flashing, and this is what we were talking about in here, is often dismissed, but statistically proven to be a gateway to further sexual abuse. So I just wanted to add that in. I would like to congratulate Marion on the fostering service inspection report, which was very good, and it's sitting there on page 221. Yes, we still have to work much harder for our care experienced children. We will never stop doing that, but I think you should be commended for the excellent report from the inspectorate. Thank you.
Oh, lovely, thank you, Claire. Is anybody else like to come in, or are we happy to approve the report? We all good? Yeah, perfect. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for that, Marion. We'll move on to agenda item 9, and it's the outcome of the Standards Commission hearing, and I'll pass to David Mitchell to speak to the report.
Thanks, Provost. Good afternoon, members. I'll keep this one short. Members will have read the report. The report sets out the details and circumstances which led to the report of a breach, the investigation, the subsequent finding of a breach, and the sanction applied by the Standards Commission in relation to that breach. The paper is here because it is a requirement of the ethical framework that such reports are then presented to the council of individual councillors. The purpose of bringing it to the council in general, any of these cases, is not to seek a retrial of the case. The matter has been dealt with the Standards Commission as set out clearly within the report. The purpose is the larger remit of simply councils being aware of what has occurred, aware of the findings, and I presume reflecting on those findings in the context of the council's own arrangements. There's a balance to be struck. As members know, the legal requirement for compliance with the code sits with individual members. It is the councillor's code, and it is for members to comply and ensure that at all times they act in a way that keeps them in compliance with the code. But equally, there are things that each council does to support its members in discharging that burden in terms of training and support, arrangements around how meetings are conducted. There are things in the council's current arrangements that have come out from previous learning in the past, but on the back of findings in relation to other councillors and other councils. The declarations of interest, for instance, came out of the Governance and Scrutiny's annual consideration of the Commission's annual report. So the purpose of bringing it here is for A, to make the council aware of the matter, and B, to allow the council in each and every of these cases to consider where there is any implications on any of the current arrangements of the council. Obviously, it's each one in its own merits. They all have to come. I'll leave it at that just now. Members will appreciate, having read the report. As monitoring officer, I was almost a mandatory participant within the process, so I will need to pick my way through if there's any detailed questions. But equally, members may feel that they have all the information they have to consider this in the context of the council's operating arrangements. Council may find that, or may come to the view that there's no action required in the particular circumstances of this case, and that would be one reasonable outcome. But if council is otherwise minded, that would be a matter for council, and I'll rest there, Provost. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Councillor Rhodes.
Thank you, Provost. I'm not going to go into the specifics, as you all have the paperwork in front of you. All I would say to every member of this council is give you my sincere apologies for my inadvertence in this matter. It was not done deliberately, and if I had have been aware at the time, I would have withdrawn from that meeting. And the rest of the information around the case is obviously within the report, but I offer each and every one of you my sincere apologies for my inadvertence with this matter. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Watts. Everybody okay? Leader.
Thanks. I think we've heard Councillor Watts apologise, and I think we just note the report and just note the report.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, everybody. We'll move on to agenda item number 10, and this is the Joe Cox Civility Commission request for funding. And I'll bring David in. Thanks.
Thanks again, Provost. This one, as members will see quite simply, the Joe Cox Foundation is a small charity that's been set up by her death, by her family following her death in 2016. Members will be familiar with the circumstances of that case and other cases involving politicians of different standing MPs and others who have been subject to these kind of attacks. So as the paper sets out, the foundation has made an approach, I think, to every council in the UK, I believe, looking for a donation or a contribution towards their work in developing approaches to protect politicians from these kind of happenings. I think by way of background that initially councils in Scotland that got this, which was L32, looked to COSLA to see if there was a single position in terms of how to respond or what would be a reasonable response, and the outcome from that was the position reached was it was for each council to take its own view and reach a position. Hence, we've brought it here for council to take a view. In essence, what council's asked is to consider making a contribution to fund the work of the commission, the foundation, of between £500 to £1,000. And it really is a matter, I don't think it's one where officers can put a price on the well-being of the elected politicians. Therefore, it is for this council to basically make that decision and direct officers, should they wish the contribution to be made. We have put information in the report about the current approach and some of the steps taken locally, and members will know both in democratic services, member services, and with the support of our health and safety colleagues, we do what we can to keep our members safe. And will continue to do so in addition to anything that may come out of the work of the foundation. So it's an ask for council to consider funding this foundation, and as I say, it really is, I think, only appropriate that council make that decision in this particular instance. So there is no specific recommendation on this one.
Thanks for that, David. Leader.
I was at the council leaders meeting last week when this came up, and I think this is, I'm going to say this is a one-off. I don't think, we're setting a precedent here, and I wouldn't like to see, who's been inundated. And I think that was a view of most other authorities around the table. So that just kind of agreed to let every local authority set its limit. From what I can gather, looking at taking a wee straw poll of other councils, £500 seems to be the kind of norm. I know there's two other authorities our size that I think Laurie and Angus and one of the Lothians have put £500. So I would be proposing that we do that. I think we've got to, the perpetrator from the Joe Cox tragedy came from this area, and as somebody said earlier, our members, some of the things that we're seeing in social media. There's an increasing threat to our safety, and as I was saying earlier on, we want to encourage people as much as possible to come into local government, and so we've got to defend that, and I think that's really something that's really important. We've seen some of the kind of really nasty politics that's hit across the pond just now. We'll not say too much about that, but there's I always look there first, and we're 2 years down the line for some of the things that's going on over there, and it's just absolutely outrageous the way some of the politicians are being affected, and their health's been affected by threats from nameless individuals. So I would recommend £500.
Thanks, Leader. Councillor Barry Douglas.
Thank you, Provost. And just to second what the council leader has said in relation to the amount of money proposed, I think most of us have probably at some point been trolled online, whether it's in our personal lives or in the roles we hold. And, it is incumbent on us all to be mindful when we're online. Now, the past provost and I have had heated discussions online, but you know what? I would go for a pint with Jim Namora and I would shake his hand and we would be friends at the end of it, because there is more in common than would ever divide us. And I think that's really important. You know, what happened to Joe, sadly, has been repeated in the late David Amos MP, who also lost his life. So in the last two parliaments, there have been two members of parliament out doing their work at their surgeries and have been killed doing their job. Nobody should ever go out to work. Nobody, no matter what their role is, no matter how high profile it is, and be threatened with their life or lose their life. And, you know, the council leader mentions what's happening in America. It is not a model for politics of the future, where lies and misinformation get spread as truth. Blatant things that you can point to as not being accurate and not being true. And that's certainly something that, you know, creeping into our politics here. And I would hope we can be avoided. Certainly in this chamber, the public perception is we all hate each other and we all get in about, you know, I think anything could be further from the truth. Deep down, we're all human beings. When I lost my dad, the first person who made contact to me and left a card was Claire Maitland, you know, because actually that's what's important. We're all humans. And I think genuinely sometimes people forget that. And actually a comment I made very recently, but somebody who perhaps does sometimes stir things up online locally, is that, you know, we mustn't forget every one of these people are humans. We all have to accept the decisions we take, but we're all human at the end of the day. And, you know, we can't preach about mental health and talk about the concerns people have for mental health, and then in one hand, you know, absolutely slate people and take them down to the lowest. For me, particularly, the council leader gets a hard time online, and he's got young kids and they shouldn't be seeing that kind of stuff. Quite frankly, we've got other members in here who have also been subjected to that, and at the end of the day, we're human. So about civility in public life is so important. You know, the stuff in COSLA, I think, in terms of some of the changes to the code of conduct as well, is vital, and I think that's good, and look forward to seeing that detail come through about that. But you know, let's hope there is never another MP or councillor or MSP ever loses their life while out doing their job. Because at the end of the day, they've been democratically elected. We might not agree with everything they say or do, but they're out doing their job. And I know for a fact, for example, in this chamber, there's not one person who doesn't do everything they do with the best intentions and to represent their constituents. Thanks, Provost.
Aye, absolutely, Barry. Thank you. Councillor Clay Maitland.
Thank you. I must admit I was extremely uncomfortable when I first read that this had gone to COSLA. I don't want it to become a precedent. However, I agree with my colleagues that have just spoken here. And interestingly enough, I will be sitting on the COSLA SIG group, which will be barriers to elected membership, and I'll have plenty to say on that. I think in this occasion, yes, we should. I've been one round on this. I wasn't. However, I was reminded that I was once a legitimate target when I was just elected, and my details were published online. I was a legitimate target, and elected members shared that and thought it was fun, and it ruined me and my family's Christmas. So to be put in a state of fear and alarm, yes, it's unacceptable. So as a one-off payment, I would agree with this. And some of the social media lately, locally, has been utterly, utterly appalling. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Claire. Councillor Graham Boyd.
Thanks, Provost. Just to reiterate and back up all the points made by everybody in this so far. Yeah, social media in particular. Information which is completely factually wrong about elected members and also officers as well. You know, reading the posted stuff is completely wrong, but folk jump in that, you know, so I don't know what we can do at a council level, but, you know, everybody it's spoken so far is 100% right, and it does have an effect on people, you know, it just grows arms and legs, you know, so I'm not saying more about it, but, you know, everybody it's spoken so far is spot on.
No, totally, Graham. Thank you. Councillor Ian Linton.
Thanks, Provost. And I think I must be spending too much time with Joe, because my question was the potential recurring nature of this. Obviously, it's in the report as this is for day-to-day funding. It's not a one-off thing they're looking to purchase here. So I think, you know, Leader and Barry and Claire have all made clear that, yeah, we're happy to support, but it really, we don't want to be setting a precedent here, and we don't want this, you know, to be going, you know, annually into the future. I don't think that's what the intention is here, but just to make that point.
Okay, thanks for that, Ian. And I think we're got Deputy Leader coming in and then we'll decide.
Thanks, Provost. Absolutely 100% agree with everything that's been said. I took my freedom for granted to move about this country at will up until 2020. Then COVID hit and I was restricted. I had the same attitude about my freedom when I became an elected member. However, what happened to Joe Cox and David Amos since made me reflect on how my freedom of movement would be and whether I would contain myself in a room with an individual I didn't know. So I decided not to do that any longer. I take it seriously. When we get threats or when we get the type of abusive language that is subjected to elected members, well, I think we've got thick crocodile skins at Disney. It's easy pierced, believe me. It is easy pierced. The people that perpetrate the comments and the abuse do it for a reason. They fuel a fire and they like it. They like doing it. It's social media. They're not governed, so to speak, by reporters' code of conduct. They're allowed to say what they want, more or less, without any repercussions. When you get stuff like that, it's no nice. We're all human beings. It's been laid out in front of us in here today. We all work closely together, but it's the barroom politicians, if I can call them that seem to know how the council operates and every legislative power and every policy we have. They don't. Where they blur the lines with the truth, fact, and then blur it with fiction, complicates things and then incites the communities that we live in to jump on that bandwagon that they set out to do. So for me, the £500 is well spent. Joe Cox is a name I think that every politician and wider all know through the UK. And if that helps spread that word around about politicians and their safety, then I'm absolutely 100% behind it.
That's great, thank you. So are we all in agreement, a one-time payment of £500 for this good cause? Absolutely. No, that's perfect. Thank you, everybody. We'll move on to agenda item number 11, and it's draft East Ayrshire Council meetings calendar for January to December. Diaries fill up fast, don't they, when these come out? Pass to Julie.
So I was just going to take it.
Cool.
Thankfully, these are getting easier. The report simply sets out the draft calendar. This reflects the council's requirements and the meetings that are within the council's full control. It reflects all previous years' knowledge and experience, and we try and retain all the normal requirements and meet the normal requirements in terms of council meetings, cabinet meetings, governance and scrutiny meetings, and fitting everything else in as well. It is only in draft, and it is only those arrangements that are within the council's gift. We highlight in paragraph 5 all the other ones that are still to be overlaid, where those decisions on future meeting dates will be taken by the Shared Services Joint Committee, COSLA, the IJB, the Ayrshire Economic Joint Committee, the Economic Partnership Board, and the two trusts, recognising they are all separate bodies and make their own decisions, including on future dates. So they'll be populated, but we know when they are, and therefore we have tried to keep the spaces free for when we would anticipate they'll be, and there's sufficient flexibility and forewarning if we need to amend anything. Again, members know, just for completeness, at Para 6, the local review body, which deals with the lesser planning appeals, that'll meet on an ad hoc basis rather than set dates when we might not need them. And the same at Para 7 for the provisional appeals. If there are appeals, we'll populate those panels and arrange them to suit the appointed members on an ad hoc basis. Just for completeness, the joint meeting of the Cabinet and the Children and Young People's Cabinet has been scheduled for March, 19th of March next year. We've also kept the councillor conversations in for ease of reference. And then there's a note that the meetings of the Qualities Forum has been reduced from 3 to 1, but that'll be a joint meeting of the Forum with the Children and Young People's Cabinet, and that'll be held on the 11th of June 25. And should there be further meetings of the Forum required, then they'll be arranged on an ad hoc basis. Other than that, there's a special council that's been put in there on the 20th of February, which at the very least will deal with the rent, independent where finance colleagues are in the budget, may or may not deal with the budget. But obviously, as you've heard, there's an awful lot to be done, and there's an awful lot of information still to be made available and decisions taken out with the council that will impact in those timescales. But members are aware, as was the case this year, that there's a very strict timeline within which we need to deal with the rent. So at the very least, that's the special that will deal with the rent, and we'll keep members advised on arrangements for budget proposals, as we always do. Other than that, it's here for approval, and hopefully. Thanks, Provost.
Thanks, David. Everybody okay with that? Okay. We'll move on to, just before the motions, there was a request for an additional item, just a quick one. And it's just recommended that Councillor Barry Douglas replace Councillor Maureen Mackay as the Labour Group representative on the IJB. Is this agreed? Leader.
Could I also indulge in just a couple of changes from our group? One is just that Councillor Todd replaced Councillor Clark on the Governance and Scrutiny, and that Councillor Clark replaced Councillor Maitland in the Grants Committee.
Cool. Everybody okay with that? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thanks, everybody. And we'll move on to the motions now. The first motion is going to be held by Councillor Cowan. As members will all be aware, proposer has 10 minutes to speak, a seconder 5 minutes, question and answers, and then 5 minutes to sum up if you wish. Floor's yours, Councillor Cowan.
Thank you, Provost, and can I take a moment to add my personal congratulations. It's wonderful to see a young woman take on the civic leadership role of this council, and hopefully it'll make what I'm about to say even more poignant. Colleagues, 2028 will be a significant anniversary in the democracy of our country as we reach 100 years of the universal voting rights for women. When I was a young girl growing up, I remember often my grandmother used to say to me, "Remember, Elaine, women died so you could vote." And even today, as an adult, often I thank my lucky stars that I've been born in Scotland, because the freedoms and the liberties that we have are not shared universally around the world. So it is a significant chronological milestone in our country, but also from a society's point of view. So to mark this major milestone in our country's history, I'm proposing that we explore the feasibility of reinstating Kilmarnock's Statue of Liberty on top of the Reformers Monument in the Quay Park. So if I can direct your attention to screens, that's an original photograph that Councillor Todd has managed to acquire for us that used to sit on top of the Reformers Monument. Now, the Reformers Monument in the Quay Park has its own history, and I'm hoping that as my seconder, Councillor Todd will explain more about the Ayrshire Radicals and the origins of that monument. The idea to involve local children and residents to work alongside a sculpture and historian to reimagine and deliver a modern interpretation of a statue, and I'm saying the modern interpretation of a statue because it may not end up being a statue. That's not my idea. I have to give full credit to the primary 4 pupils on Thank Primary School. I believe actually it's a lot of the primary schools in the local authority area do a historic research on America, and as part of that they look at the Statue of Liberty that's in New York Harbour. When I was visiting on Thank Primary, the teacher was telling me about the children's project research this year, and they were stunned to find out that Kilmarnock used to have its own Statue of Liberty. So the children actually asked, well, why can't we get it back? And I thought, that's amazing, let's dream big, why can't we get it back? And I had been searching for an idea about how to mark 100 years of women's vote, so that's how I brought the motion together today. Obviously, that statue and that monument is located in Kilmarnock, so the other section of the motion would be to develop a celebratory festival of local democracy that brings to life the story of the Ayrshire Radicals, the fight for parliamentary reform, the origins of the monument, and the reinstatement of the Statue of Liberty in dedication to the centenary anniversary of the universal voting rights of women. So obviously that celebratory festival of local democracy could be extended across East Ayrshire, perhaps across all our schools. The motion really is just to ask for agreement in principle that we look at the feasibility of how we can go about this and how we can actually recognise 100 years of women's voting rights. And it is 4 years' time, so we have plenty of time to plan for this and explore different ideas. Thank you.
Nice, thank you. Councillor Jim Todd.
Thanks very much, Provost. Thanks, Elaine. Folks, I'm not going to go in too much in detail because you can all find it yourself. Everybody knows the story of, we call them the Kilmarnock Martyrs. It's a reformers movement. But this all started a way back. It was during the Peninsular Wars when a lot of young men went over to fight in what is now Spain and Portugal against Bonaparte. And at that time, and what goes along with the reformers movement, was by 1820, after Waterloo and the Allies won with the help of the Prussians, it seems to be Wellington won it on his own. Prussians had a big say in it as well. But when all these young men were coming back home, I mean, everybody's heard of the Peterloo massacre. There's no such place as Peterloo in England. It's Petersfield in Manchester. But there were at least 2 young men that fought in the Manchester Regiment at Waterloo get killed by the Manchester yeomanry because they were fighting for rights for their families. So it became the Peterloo Massacre. There's a brilliant film about it. It was released a few years ago. Please watch it because it's all true. And these young men were coming back to the country all over, come back to Kilmarnock. And one was an acting captain in the Ayrshire yeomanry. And he came back with his men. And at this time, as we all know, if you know your history, Kilmarnock was a substantial town. And there was only one person who had the vote. And that was Major Parker from Aslaw's House. He was the only person that had the vote in this area. So these young men came back, and they were coming back to destitution because up to that time when they went away to fight, when they were press ganged away to fight, there was subsistence living where the individual families maybe had a goat or a cow, whatever, and going back to the common good. That's where the term the common good came from, and that's where the term the commoners came from, because after Bannockburn, the Bruce, the king, decided that the people had supported him so much that he designated areas all around the country as for the common good. That was land where people could graze their sheep, their cows, all their animals. And through the years, it's been taken back by unscrupulous landlords. And that was the issue that these young men came back from. Their families had been taken off their subsistence houses and crofts and brought into the town centre where there was mills getting built. So all the mill owners and all the landlords were wanting all of these men, women and children to work in the mills. And it was an absolutely terrible time. Nobody had any rights. And when these young men came back, they got together with all the other radicals around Scotland or around the UK and demanded better conditions. So in a nutshell, the 6 Kilmarnock Martyrs, as we know, I could rattle them all off, but they get tried with sedition, just for the point of trying to get better conditions for them and their families. And they were sentenced to death. There was a near riot in the town, as there was all over the country, so they were commuted to them transportation. The rest ended up in jail. At least 2 died in the jail. So years later, all of the great good people of Kilmarnock got together and decided to have, I'm okay.
I think your replacement as Provost is simply trying to fulfil the function of the post and stick to the 5 minutes that she did remind everybody before you started, Provost.
Okay, right. I'll be I'll finish up.
But be much more polite about it than me.
Thank you. So this is the people got together and they commissioned this beautiful statue. It stood 11.5 feet tall, and it was all about shining the light of democracy, and the quill was for writing legislation that protected the people. And it would be great to bring that back. Thanks, Provost.
Smashing. Councillor Barry Douglas.
Thank you, Provost, and thank you to Councillor Cowan and Councillor Todd for bringing forward that motion. Something actually I've long supported is to see the Reformers Monument in some way restored. And actually, it was St Andrew's Primary School in my own ward recently who they didn't even realise, but doing the same kind of thing that Elaine was talking about, didn't actually realise that we had our own Statue of Liberty here in Kilmarnock. I think the key thing here is it is vital to remember that only 100 years ago, if you weren't landed gentry, and you were not getting the vote. You know, working class men first started getting the vote, and then it took how long? You know, only 100 years ago. We have relatives, I'm sure, in this room. We all have direct descendants who maybe not long past, really, who didn't have the right to vote. That's shocking in a democracy, utterly shocking. And, you know, I welcome all moves and whatever we can do to promote democracy. And remember this, because democracy is fragile. And, you know, 100 years might seem a long time ago to many people, but it really isn't. In fact, I think it was 1974 that I think when the age was reduced from 21 to, was it 60? Okay, in terms of the election, though, that came by 1974, the February general election in 1974, which would have been the first where 18-year-olds, so adults, absolutely, as we would consider, had the right to vote. You know, before then you had to be 21. So it's amazing the advancements in the franchise and how important democracy is. What I would ask is that in relation to this, we maybe look at how we can get funding from elsewhere. Council budgets are incredibly tight, but I think involving our young people, involving our history groups, what can we do to leverage in money elsewhere to do something here? Even, I know this is for a feasibility, and Councillor Cowan's been pretty clear on that, but it's just we don't want to have a situation whereby when council budgets are tight, that we and would be fairly criticised, I think, in the public on something like this. However, that's not mean to say we can't have nice things, and we shouldn't be looking again at restoring the monument that, as I say, I think it was 1939 that the statue actually came down in a storm. So it'd be good to see it restored. Thank you, Provost.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor John McFadden.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Councillor Cowan and Councillor Todd for this motion, and you know, it's hugely important that we celebrate this and remember this. And you know, we can't change the past, but we can remember it to ensure that we don't do it again in the future. And a great idea. I'd love to see something very similar here in Kilmarnock. You know, on top of the monument, it'd be great to see it. And then if you know if the council was of a mind to start a funding page or anything like that, I'd gladly contribute something towards something like that. And I'm sure many of us would as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kevin McGregor online.
Thank you very much, Chair, and can I also offer my congratulations to you for your elevation to the big chain, and thank former Provost Todd for his years of service. Please bear with me, I'm absolutely chock full of a cold. I just wanted to say, like Councillor Douglas mentioned, as someone who grew up, you know, within a stone's throw of the K Park, the Reformers Monument literally loomed over us when we were growing up, and we've always wondered if the statue could be replaced. Obviously, we've had the trauma of what happened to the original Burns Monument, so this would be really exciting. But just to know, it's another maybe the work of reformers locally, as well as the work of like the Fenwick Weavers and the cooperative movement, and even slavery abolitionists like the Freeman Frederick Douglass, who passed through East Ayrshire a number of times and spoke. Just shows you what a rich history we have of social justice and efforts to realise that. So I would absolutely support Councillor Cowan's motion, and I will also concur with Councillor Todd that the Peterloo film, if you haven't seen it, get it watched. But thanks, Provost.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Councillor Peter Maven.
Thank you, Provost. As much as I would like to see a new statue placed on top of the Reformers Monument, there's a couple of different things that are troubling me with this. First of all, the Reformers Monument was built with public subscriptions. It was erected in 1885, and at that point, it was nothing to do with women's votes. They were trying to get votes for men. They weren't interested in women's votes at that time. They were trying to get votes away from the landowners. The women's movement very much came to the fore later after the Great War. I would propose an amendment that if we go forward with this, it might be better passed on to the Kilmarnock Town Board, or we make Kilmarnock, and it should be done by public subscription, and not a penny of council money should be used on this, because council budgets are far too tight, and we don't want to be spending council money on this. It should be a public subscription.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Leader?
I really truly would have hoped that this wouldn't come to some kind of division, and surely the franchisement of the women's vote is something we can all get behind as part of the build towards democracy. And I think it's about maybe making it stronger in this day and age when democracy is well and truly challenged with some of the discussions we had earlier about social media and fake news and all the rest of it. And, you know, we know that down in South Ayrshire we've got a humanitarian ward that they do regularly. It'd be good to do some kind of award for democracy and promoting democracy within our communities. That's something for maybe to take on board as well. I was thinking I was going to suggest, but I hope we can all get behind that and realise it's the gist of where we're trying to go, Peter. Is it's about democracy, and I hope we can get think again, get behind the motion.
I think Eddie'd like to come in at this point, and I'll bring this in.
So just there is for clarity, and I spoke with Councillor Cowan as well before this. This is about a feasibility study. So what members have been asked to do here is actually not put council money against this. It's actually to do a feasibility study, because we recognise that at this time. So at that stage, understanding, because I don't think any of us got a real understanding of the quantum of resource that would be spoken about here, and depending on the quantum of resource, people might feel differently around that. So at this stage, all councillor the motion is asking for is for agreement that we go ahead with a feasibility study, not, as you say, councillor Maven, actually use public funds at this time at all.
Councillor Graham Boyd.
Thanks, Provost. As a local historian, the history behind this is really important. And, when you look at it at the K Park, it's just a column at the moment and a turning circle for cars or buses. And a lot of local people wonder what it is. So, bringing this back, explaining the local history of it. Also, the local history groups, the Ayrshire Federation, I'm sure we get behind this. If we support this today, then you're looking at maybe funding in the future. The local history groups can provide support as well. So, yeah, I think this could be a good thing. Certainly the proposal to look at its feasibility. Yep, it's really important.
Thank you for that. Councillor James Adams online.
Thank you. We spoke about age earlier, or indeed some of the councillors did. I'm old enough to remember that there was a public subscription trying to get re-established probably about 30 years ago. Now, that would predate anyone that's in the chamber today, but it might be worthwhile trying to ascertain where that money is, because I'm fairly sure it'll still be somewhere. But just, to note that, but fully supportive of the premise. Thank you.
Thanks, James. I get some giggles in the chamber for your age comments. I'll take the leader, and then I've got a couple others on my.
Sadly, James, I've been here 32 years with Kilmarnock and Loud and East Ayrshire. I don't recall anything coming out of Kilmarnock Loud in my time during there. It would have to be before 92. But
Oh, I don't want to point out that you started the council when I was 1 year old, but that's fine. Councillor Claire Maitland.
Hello, I'd just like to point out that the women's suffrage movement started in the 1850s, and the first debate on women's votes was in 1867 in Westminster, so it actually predates the statute. Sorry, Peter.
Thank you. Councillor David Richardson.
I've loved this debate so far. I mean, there's a few of I collect Napoleonic figures, and we've had Councillor Todd mention the Battle of Waterloo, and he's absolutely right about the Prussians, because the Duke reportedly said, "Give me knight" or "Give me Blucher," because it was on a knife edge. Yeah. But history being history is one thing. I think this is really important because of what's happening in the world today, because we only have to think about 4 years ago, where a defeated candidate in the most powerful democracy in the world absolutely tried to usurp democracy and geed his followers on to invade Capitol Hill, which is one of the most, everybody who loves democracy, that's one of the places in the world where, there were people carrying Confederate flags. Let's not go into that. It's what that stood for. But they were actually storming the the basis of the most powerful democracy in the world. The worrying thing is he's actually been allowed to stand again. He's not in the jail. But the most important thing here is that our school kids learn all about this history, but learn about the history so that they can actually take democracy forward and understand how important democracy is.
Thank you. Is everybody all right? Elaine, do you want to sum up? Or?
Thank you, Provost. Not really sum up, just to pick up a couple of comments there, and to thank colleagues. That was a very interesting discussion, and happy to take it offline and keep it going. I was careful in the wording of it. That is why I've said explore the feasibility. It's all about the art of the possibility and what can be done there. And it's also why I said a modern interpretation, so it may not be something carved out of career marble. With regard to the funding, I have had some initial discussions with one of the town centre regeneration officers, and there are options for external funding for public works of art and even new sculpture, for example. Gosh, I'm going to forget this chap's name now, but there are some funding streams out there that we can look at. And also the idea about maybe some public GoFundMe is another option that we can look at. But really, it was just the principle here to somehow mark this major milestone in the democracy of our country. As I said earlier, I was always reminded by my grandmother when she was referring to the suffragette movement. And obviously, I do thank my lucky stars. I'm a female born in Scotland, because you look at places like Afghanistan and other countries around the world where women are not valued and they're not given the same freedom and liberties that we enjoy in our daily life. And also it links back to some of the comments we made earlier about the Joe Cox Civility Commission. So thank you for everybody's contribution.
Thanks, Councillor Cowan. David?
Just going to say to give members assurance, then we'll reflect in a minute what we take from members' consideration item, which is it's consider the feasibility of what a modern interpretation of the statute might look like, what that may cost, and there may be more than one option to involve the school children and residents in that consideration, to look at various alternative sources of funding. It's a very clear message, and without listing them here, that will all be explored. And I think, taking Councillor Maven's point, it would be appropriate to also give consideration as to which other bodies, agencies, partners, whatever you want to call them, would also have a meaningful role to play here, or a seat at the table, to develop the thinking in that and bring a paper back to Council to then see what the options are, and invite Council at that stage to set the direction of travel based on that initial feasibility study. So we will tease out all those elements, and that's what will be brought back and covered in the next report, setting out the consideration of those matters, if that gives Council assurance.
Thanks for that, David. Councillor Barry Douglas.
Thank you, Provost. Just if you can indulge me a second, I wonder if it's maybe something certainly for the Ward 4 members as well. There's been long chat of various people talking about a sort of forensic APAP type group, and I wonder if it's something that potentially the four of us could look to do to work with our constituents on, that could then build on that in terms of local schools and everything else. But I just wonder, given the location of the monument, if that might be a good start. But it's just a thought. But I know this goes much wider than that. It's more just to try and get a start of a kind of catalyst for this. But I'll hear what Councillor Cowan has to say in that regard. Thanks.
Through you, Provost, absolutely. No, my intention was to get it on people's radar and start the conversation so that we could do something formal. So I'm happy, and I'm open to all options.
Okay. So as is in the motion, is everybody happy to proceed with the feasibility? So yeah, is that okay? Right, okay. Thank you so much, Aberdeen. Thank you, Councillor Cowan. That was really interesting. We'll move on to the second motion, which is a motion by Councillor Neil Ingram, and I'll pass to yourself, Neil.
Thank you so much, Provost Leach. It's no surprise that I'd like to add my voice to the congratulations to you on receiving the position of Provost of East Ayrshire. It's a privilege for me as your colleague and friend to see you take on that role, and I know you'll bring your passion for fairness, equality and inclusiveness to it, as always.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so moving on to the motion. The motion put before you and members today is one that I'd hoped might have been surplus to requirements by now. I watched the Chancellor of the Exchequer yesterday with hope that there might have been a U-turn on this harmful policy, where the new UK government had reflected on the many voices against this move and decided to scrap the proposed means testing of the winter fuel payment. Unfortunately, the UK government still intends to remove the universality of this important measure. I think it's important to recognise that it was the Labour Party that introduced the winter fuel payment, and it has been universally available to those of pension age since 1997. The measure itself is designed to alleviate fuel poverty amongst pensioners, and for many of those that have received the benefit, it has been a lifeline. In 2017, the Labour Party, in opposition, argued against the then Conservative Westminster government and their plans to introduce means testing and to link the eligibility to pension credit. The research the Labour Party used to argue their case stated that half of the almost 10,000 decrease in the so-called excess winter deaths between 2000 and 2012 was due to the introduction of the winter fuel allowance. They stated that the means testing the winter fuel allowance for pensioners could contribute almost 4,000 extra deaths over the winter months. Given their previous position, it is surprising and equally disappointing that one of the first policies Labour introduced as a new government is the one they fought so hard against when in opposition. It's also concerning that while it is clear that the link between the decrease in excess deaths and the winter fuel payment was known, the government failed to undertake an impact assessment before moving to adopt this policy. It may not be a statutory requirement, but it must be a moral imperative to understand the implications for many of our poorest pensioners. Our motion is very straightforward. We call on the Westminster Government to halt the changes to winter fuel payment at UK level until an impact assessment can be done and the eligibility for pension credits be reviewed. The government must ensure that no pension is forced into fuel poverty due to the winter fuel payment being linked to pension credit eligibility. This chimes with other groups concerned that the changes to winter fuel payment will adversely affect many pensioners in East Ayrshire and across the UK. Age UK called this move a social injustice. Unite the Union members are campaigning to defend the winter fuel payment and are calling on others to join them. And Martin Lewis from the money saving expert has asked that eligibility be widened to address the gap between the cliff edge of pension credit eligibility and the support it unlocks, and those on the wrong side of eligibility who will feel the withdrawal of the universality the most. They and many others have called on the UK government to reverse and halt the changes to introduce the means testing of the winter fuel payment. It's estimated that over 800,000 households aren't claiming pension credit. Apologies, I think I might have skipped forward a wee bit. I did. I'll go back. Okay, so just at the end of the means testing the winter fuel payment, Age UK's statement by the Charity Director, Caroline Abrams, CBE, on the Chancellor's announcement to end means testing winter fuel payments highlight the group of pensioners that will be affected by these changes. Those that are entitled to but do not claim pension credit, those that fall outside or just fall outside the eligibility. I've managed to skip ahead again. Apologies.
It's jumping.
Yeah, keeps jumping. So if members just allow me to continue, I'll start again. Age concern statement by the Charity Director, Caroline Abrams, CBE, on the Chancellor's announcement to means test winter fuel payments highlight the group of pensioners that will be affected by these changes. Those that are entitled to but do not claim pension credit, those that fall just outside the eligibility for pension credit, who rely on the winter fuel payment to make ends meet, and those who may have income that is a little higher but required to keep their homes warm due to health concerns or due to energy inefficient homes, all feel the loss of the winter fuel payment. It's estimated that over 800,000 households aren't claiming pension credit, even though they're eligible. That's according to the Department for Work and Pensions. There is a current push by the DWP to encourage pensioners to apply for pension credits, which I welcome, but unfortunately this doesn't address the reason so many have not already taken up their entitlement. I've had people share their concerns with me that they are worried that if they apply for pension credit, they will end up worse off, not better. More needs to be done to engage with pensioners on pension credit, informing them on the additional benefits available to them, supporting them through the application process, and to give pensioners confidence in the system, but also to address any issues with the system where identified. However, even if all 800,000 plus households apply and are successful, this will not fully address the issue. While pension credit is there to address pensioner poverty, many pensioners that have incomes just over the cut-off to qualify are still struggling financially. According to Age UK estimates, there are an additional 1 million pensioners across the UK whose weekly incomes are less than £50 above the poverty line. A matter of pounds, that means pensioners are not eligible for a range of financial supports they could benefit from through the gateway of pension credit. With the changes to the winter fuel payment, they lose a vital support which gave them confidence to turn on the heating at a time of inflated energy costs. This will lead to households choosing between heating and eating or disconnecting entirely to make ends meet. As we discussed earlier in regard to healthy life expectancy and living with health conditions, not being able to heat your home will be a significant factor in those health conditions and the potential for exacerbating them. To give you an idea of the impact on our pensions in East Ayrshire, you only have to look at how many have been in receipt of the winter fuel payment previously and how many are receiving pension credit. In East Ayrshire for 23-24, just over 17,500 households received the winter fuel payment. In the same year, just under 3,500 households received pension credit, a difference of 14,000 households, or 80%, will no longer receive that extra payment. By my calculations, that is between 2.8 million and 4.2 million locally. A huge hit to East Ayrshire and worryingly potential implications to the health of our most vulnerable pensioners. That's why the changes to winter fuel payment and its link to the eligibility of pension credit must be reviewed. Unless the cliff edge of eligibility is addressed, it will continue to hit the most vulnerable and leave many without the support they need if, after review, there is still no way to ensure those that need the winter fuel payment receives it, that it must remain a universal payment. I hope you can join with me to support and approve this motion, and I thank my colleague, Councillor Jim McMahon, for seconding me.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ingram. If I may just take this opportunity to set my stall as the new Ayrshire Provost. The MD's got comments or questions, please come through me. I'm willing to hear everybody and we'll do everything in a respectful manner. Everybody's fine moving forward. Councillor McMahon, you're seconding Neil's motion?
Yeah, it's a pleasure in seconding the motion. I think Councillor Ingram's going to steal a lot of my thunder with the facts and figures that he's provided to you this afternoon, and I'm certainly not going to repeat them. This wasn't a feasibility study, this was a removal of the winter fuel payment. We need consultation on impact on anybody's health and what potentially that's going to cost the NHS going into this winter with what's predicted in excess of another 4,000 plus winter deaths that's going to come forward. Excuse me, Scotland are telling us there's 900 people taken to hospital with hypothermic conditions last year. We know that's potentially going to increase in some of the figures that Councillor Ingram have quoted, and as predicted, we've got work concerns about our older people. I've personally witnessed it already, where some of our older people that are visited sitting with pliers round about their legs, fear to turn on their heating, are the most vulnerable people in our communities. These are folk that we've got to look after. Eddie spoke earlier on and Craig spoke earlier on there about the vulnerabilities of our older people as we get older and increasing by age. So really concerned. I'm happy to second Councillor Ingram, but I think before I do that, I think I've got to touch on the budget and implications of that budget yesterday and the £40 million that was there. There was addressed prior to the budget of a £22 million black hole that I know Labour opposition, or the Labour opposition at the time, were aware of. So that £22 million black hole then becomes 40 billion to cover that. £1.4 billion would cover the winter payment, the winter fuel payment. It's a small price to pay, but what I would say would be a socialist policy as opposed to a budget that was covering part of just a treasury. So for me, it doesn't sit good. We've spoke about mitigation all the way through our conversations today. We as a council, coming up the back of the Scottish Government's programme for government, and one of their main priorities was about eradicating child poverty. This is fuel poverty, but just quickly touching on that child poverty and the two-child cap, we know that would have, again, £1.7 billion, would have lifted potentially 700,000 kids. So take 700,000 kids on top of what pensioners that's going to be subjected to cold winters, or depriving themselves possibly of food to try and heat their house. And I'm not going to say they're going to heat their house. One thing was clear yesterday that that was a £40 million tax site, and I'm clear on that. That was a tax. I think local members and the opposition sometimes get confused with what's a tax and what is a charge, as I've read in some of the literature recently. One thing before I go, I think maybe the opposition might say we have an option at the Scottish Government to pull this back, and it's up to us. But if I could quote the current Health Minister and Social Care, all roads do lead back to Westminster.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Leader. I'll open the floor, and Councillor John McFadden.
Thank you, Provost. I think this is a very cruel and dangerous policy in playing Russian roulette with people's lives. And if there was ever going to be any means testing for the winter fuel payment, the bar should be set miles and miles up to a point where it's only people who really don't need it, have got plenty of money, who don't get it. And even then, the money they don't take should probably be split up between the people that do get it. Because the other thing as well, I agree with everything that's been said here in the motion and everything. It's not really being looked at very carefully, because we're going to have a lot more people sick, ill, hypothermia and not well. Now, the winter fuel payment's £300 a go. It's £300 to £1,000 a day in hospital to keep someone in hospital. So all the extra people will get falling ill because of this, because of the cold and things and contracting stuff, they're all going to end up in hospital. So we're going to need some of the extra £26 billion that the NHS is being given just to keep the people that this policy is going to send to hospital. It's not going to save money in the long run. It just isn't. That's my opinion. And I think it should be reversed. And I completely agree with the motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McFadden. Councillor Peter Mebane.
Thank you, Provost. On behalf of the Labour Group, I'd like to propose an amendment worded as follows. This council welcomes the budget yesterday, which will see an extra £3.4 billion of funding to the Scottish Government. Welcomes the extra £29 per week boost to the pensions of former mine workers. Welcomes the increase in pension credit for those eligible, £465 per annum for single pensioners and £710 for pensioner couples. Welcomes the commitment to the triple lock, ensuring pensioners on the new state pension receive an extra £450 this year and £900 next year, and the £360 increase for those on the basic state pension. We further call on the UK Government and the Scottish Government to work constructively and revisit their positions regarding winter fuel payment changes, and look to revise both the threshold for claiming pension credit, supporting all efforts to maximise the take-up of pension credit for those entitled, and revise the eligibility for the winter fuel payment to ensure no pensioner is faced with fuel poverty.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Mebane. Councillor Linda Mebane.
Thank you, Provost. Firstly, it's been pointed out to me I'm the only person in the room that's spoken that hasn't congratulated you. So my sincere apologies, Claire. You're my Ward 7 workie, I suppose. So
I am absolutely not precious, don't you worry.
No, sincerely, I wish you all the best, and you deserve it. So I'm not going to add too much. I don't really think. I think there's been enough said in the room. So I'm just happy to second Councillor Peter Mabin's motion, amendment, sorry. Thank you.
That's fine, thank you so much. I have to honestly say I didn't even notice. It's fine, thank you so much. Councillor Jim Todd.
Thanks very much, Provost. You know, it's one of these ones where, you know, it's always careful what you wish for. And in 2022, I mean, my colleagues behind me in the Labour Party were putting leaflets out saying, if you vote Labour, you'll save £1,000 off your energy bills. That was in 2022. And then leading up to just before the summer election, vote Labour and we'll set up a GB Energy based in Scotland. Didn't tell you they're going to put the manager down in Manchester, but based in Scotland, that will save you £300 on your energy bills. So there's all these promises. I don't think this is the change that my colleagues behind me were talking about before the election. The change is that it's pensioners that are going to have the worst of times, because it's pensioners that are an easy target. Now, that's for any government that's in power at Westminster. And it's one of these things where, as I said earlier in another comment, I should have retired to get my state pension at 65. I've paid for that all of my life. When I first got that letter, 1976 it was, this 1% out of your salary will pay for your old age pension at 65. I've worked for 50 odd years to be told next year I'm not going to get my state pension. So it always seems to be the workers that get hammered. Doesn't matter what government's in power in Westminster. And the change that I thought was going to happen was, well, maybe this new government's going to chase the offshore tax havens. Maybe this new government's going to chase all those folk. There's been wee steps, baby steps, about that non-domicile tax loophole. But if you look at the tax system as a whole in this country, it's all about keeping the rich rich. And the change that I wanted to see from the new Labour government at Westminster was attacking those loopholes. That hasn't happened. And as always happens at Westminster, it's those at the bottom of the pile that have got to pay. And unfortunately this time it's the pensioners.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Councillor Richardson.
Jim's just mentioned pensioners there. I mean, you work all your life to build up a pension pot so you can retire. Now, my pension pot, when I die, I would like to think that would, you know, flow to my wife, what's left of it. However, yesterday's budget, your whatever's left of your pension when you die will now form part of your estate. If your estate is over £325,000, that pension pot will now be liable to inheritance tax. That's just one point. I'm looking at an interview here. I went to Dewsbury last winter before last in the height of the energy prices going up and spoke to an 84-year-old woman, worked all her life, obviously now a pensioner, and she told me that she doesn't get out of bed until midday because she didn't want to. And then she went to get out of her bed, she had to put on a thermal jacket that she just wore all day long, so she didn't have to put on the heating up very high. That's an awful position to put a pensioner in, and there are just too many of those stories. Another pensioner, it was actually the same group in Dewsbury, was describing to me going around the supermarket and picking something up and looking at the price and then putting it back in the shelf. Now, you would say that's not the hardest thing in the world. Well, actually it is. When you just feel after having worked all your life, I just have, you know, I want to lead now. That's the sense of insecurity, I think, that eats away at people. That was a Labour Party advert called Change, Vote Labour, Thursday the 4th of July, and those are the words of Sir Keir Starmer. Now, has there ever been a party that's got into power on a manifesto, and once they've been in, done exactly the opposite.
Thanks, David. It's like an election coming up or something. Like, Councillor Stephen Cannon.
Thanks, Provost. Just want to thank Linda, because Linda wasn't the only person that didn't congratulate you, because I'm almost certain I didn't congratulate you. So congratulations. But I think everything's been said, and obviously I support the motion.
Yous are all really lovely, but very honestly, like, yous care more than me, and I really appreciate all your supports, because yous are all lovely. Thank you. But thank you. Right, so currently we've got a motion and an amendment to a motion. David?
If members are all happy that anyone wishing to speak has spoken, and assuming that there is, from the content of each of the motion and the amendment, no likelihood of any further discussion bringing that into a single proposition, then, as I say, if all members have been heard, then it would be appropriate now to proceed to the vote, bearing in mind that with members on Teams, that will be by way of roll call.
Yeah, no, sure. Neil, did you want to sum up before anything goes ahead?
Yeah, I wonder if I could. I mean, I suppose I did expect the Labour group would bring an amendment. I wasn't expecting it to be a self-congratulatory on the budget, given the fact that this is dealing with a very specific issue in regard to winter fuel payments, and the link directly to pension credit as the eligibility for that specific benefit. So I'd just like to say I understand, and I listened, like I said in my opening remarks, that I listened to the Chancellor's outlining the way that she's looking to take the UK forward, and she mentioned many times that this was an end to austerity, but the policy and proposal that they introduced just before the budget is total austerity. It's something that is going to impact on some of the most vulnerable in our society, and it needs to be addressed. The Martin Lewis, like I said earlier before, said that the eligibility criteria is too narrow, and it will exclude a large number of people who either do not qualify for pension credit or do not want to go forward and apply for pension credit because they're feared of losing money. So the universality of the winter fuel payment is key to ensure that people do not get forced into fuel poverty. So I'd just like to highlight that to members, that this isn't about anything else in the budget. I appreciate that there is an increase to pensions coming down the line, but this is taken away from one hand and given with the other. For many, it'll just cancel it out. So I won't go any further than that, Provost, but I just wanted to add that at the end. Thanks.
Okay, but thanks for that. Is anybody else want in before we go ahead? Okay. Councillor.
Sorry, Provost, I'm sorry for keeping this going a wee bit longer, but it's just for clarity. I know it was a long list that Councillor Maben came out with. It was just one, I didn't hear if he was going to lobby our local MPs who both voted for that in the list, in his amendment.
Okay, Councillor, but I think was your amendment, as you said?
I'm happy to read it again if you like.
No, I don't think it's necessary. Like, if that's okay.
The amendment is what I read it.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Thank you.
Okay, David, can I pass to you then for the vote?
Sure, we'll just proceed by way of roll call vote. So Julie will just take us through that. As I say, remember it's by roll call because members are on Teams. So just take us through, Julie. Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you very much. So I shall call the roll. Could you indicate, please, for the motion by Councillor Ingram, seconded by Councillor McMahon, or for the amendment by Councillor Peter Mabin, seconded by Councillor Linda Mabin. I appreciate there are a few members that have now left the meeting and online, so I'll not be calling out their names. So to begin with, Provost Claire Leach.
Motion.
Councillor Stephen Canning.
Motion.
Councillor John McFadden.
Motion.
Councillor Elaine Cowan.
Motion.
Councillor David Richardson.
Motion.
Councillor James Adams.
Motion.
Councillor Douglas Reid. Councillor Graham Barton.
Motion.
Councillor Graham Boyd.
Motion.
Councillor Neil Ingram.
Motion, thanks.
Councillor Peter Mabin.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Claire Maitland.
Motion.
Councillor Jim Todd.
Motion.
Councillor Beverly Clark.
Motion.
Councillor Sally Cogley.
Amendment.
Councillor Kevin McGregor.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Linda Mabin.
Amendment, please, Julie. Thanks.
Councillor Billy Crawford.
Amendment.
Councillor June Kyle.
Amendment.
Councillor Jim McMahon.
Motion.
Councillor Neil Watts.
Motion.
Councillor Drew Filson.
Motion.
And Councillor Jennifer Hogg.
Motion, please.
Thank you. The motion is carried by 17 votes to 6. Thank you, members.
Okay, everybody, that was a mammoth one the day, wasn't it? Thank you, everybody, for your contributions. And it would be amiss me not to say happy Halloween to everybody. Every day is Halloween, for me anyway. So that concludes the business of the council meeting. I'll draw the meeting to a close and the recording of the meeting will now finish. Thank you, everybody.